Good morning. Did everybody get a good stretch? Okay. Am I feedbacking now? I can't tell. It's no feedback. Okay. Thank you for inviting me here. My name is Teri Wathen. I have a hearing loss, so I'm going to be talking about that population today. Actually, that's interesting that I just said I have a hearing loss because basically I am deaf. I wear 2 cochlear implants. When I have them on, I can hear very well if I am looking at you, but when I take them off, I am totally deaf and I sleep very well at night, which means that if you're coming to get me, I'm not going to hear you. My first interest in all of this came about in 1983 when we had Tropical Storm, which one? Allison? Okay. I was sitting in the comfort of my living room watching all of the people around Houston and all of the awful things that were happening. The one thing I remember was seeing the people on the rooftops of their house and helicopters flying by to rescue them. And even though I was feeling sorry for them, I kept thinking about myself. If I'm on the top of my house, probably my processors have gone out by now because they're not supposed to get completely wet like that. And the people in the helicopter are yelling instructions to me, and I'm not going to understand what they're saying. So this has been a passion of mine to help people with any kind of hearing loss, whether it's just a mild loss or whether they're totally deaf, in emergency situations. Okay, so basically I have a contract through Communication Accessibility Group, which is a sign language interpreting agency, and our contract is through DARS, Department of Assistive and Rehabilitative Services, through the Office for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services. Mouthful. And my title is Hearing Loss Resource Specialist. Also in my office are 2 other people who have a contract as a deafness resource specialist. And what our roles are is to let people who have any degree of hearing loss to know what services, what resources, what technology is available to help them, and also what their rights are as a person with a disability. And the next slide says count us in. You've already heard that from the other speakers. Whenever you're doing your planning, your evacuations or whatever, please include us in your plan because we can tell you what our needs are. Okay, so how many of us are there? You already know if you have my PowerPoint. This particular one says between 36 and 42 million people with some degree of hearing loss. My guess is that the number is probably much larger than that because we have so many people who do not admit to having a hearing loss. I want to just kind of take a poll in here. How many of you, either you have a hearing loss or have a family member who has some degree of hearing loss? Let me see your hands. Wow, that's almost all of you. Okay, if I add that to, do you know someone with the hearing loss? Now let's see if we've got everybody. Okay. And my guess is you probably do, and maybe you don't know it, because there are so many people who, for some reason, they don't want anybody to know. And I know what the reason is. There is a stigma attached to having a hearing loss. People are afraid they may lose their job, or people think that they're stupid. So we've got all kinds of degrees of hearing loss. I've met all of them across my table. That number comes out to, and for some reason this particular slide didn't come out very well, but it's actually about 1 out of every 9 people has some degree of hearing loss. And again, the statistics change depending on what you look at. How many people do we have in the room today? Maybe 50 or 60? That means there's at least 7 people in this room. There's probably more, but I know there's at least 7, whether you all want to admit it or not. Think about that the next time you're in a large room. This is kind of a breakdown. We have many types of people with hearing loss. We have the culturally deaf. These are people who use American Sign Language as their main means of communication. Culturally deaf people are a close-knit community, very politically active and very proud of their deafness. Then we also have about 5% of that is late deafened. These are people who have lost some hearing after acquiring speech. And again, that hearing loss can range from mild to profound. Some of them are oral, they lip read only, some of them sign. But the biggest piece of that pie is going to be what we call hard of hearing. Generally, about 93% of the population is hard of hearing. And again, that can be from mild to profound. I call myself hard of hearing mainly because I've always grown up with my hearing loss. It was very mild when I started. So I still tell people I'm hard of hearing. But when I take these processors off, I am deaf. If you look at my audiogram, if you know anything about audiograms, it's down at the bottom. So I am deaf, but I don't call myself deaf. So it's an identity issue. So if you know someone with the hearing loss and ask them what they prefer to be called, many of them probably don't even know. Those of us who are active in the community, we do know. Okay, so let's move on. Well, we're all the same, and we all communicate the same. Not. That is not true. Many ways of communicating, and this is why it's important for you here to know, because if you've had only experience with me, and I said, all I have to do is see your lips, and you're looking at me, I can communicate with you. But the next person you meet may not be able to read your lips. They may need to communicate in a different way. And so that's important if you're going to be in an emergency situation. Okay, so I have 3 categories listed up here. Notice that the first one is a little d deaf, and the second one is a capital D deaf. And there's a difference. Little d deaf could be me, because I am deaf, but I do not use sign language. The capital D deaf generally use American Sign Language as their main means of communication. They may lip read, maybe not, but they identify themselves as deaf. They use interpreters. They are proud of their deafness. And there's a difference there in the way they communicate and the way I communicate. And then, of course, your last one is hard of hearing. And everybody's kind of just, it's a big blur. But the communication issue is what's different. And that's why I wanted to point that out to you, that we're not all the same. We're lumped together. You will hear that phrase, deaf and hard of hearing, all the time. But it's a totally different way of communicating. Okay, Hurricane Floyd, we had a deaf woman who was sitting on the top of her roof for 3 days because there was no captions on her TV. So she had no way of being informed of what was going on. That's pretty sad. In chemical spill, I can just imagine this. If there's a vehicle going around giving announcements, I can hear okay, but not announcements like that on a vehicle going around, any kind of a PA system. I can hear it, but I cannot understand it. There's a difference between hearing and comprehending. Please remember that. Hurricane Sandy. Now, the reason I have this up here, did any of you happen to see when Mayor Bloomberg was giving his, when he was on the news and there was the interpreter next to her? And there was a lot of communication about that because she was so expressive. And many people thought that she was taking away from what he was saying. What you have to understand is that as an interpreter, she was mimicking his accent, his emotions, and the way he was saying it. So it actually was good for the deaf community because it let the whole world know, hey, these people are being accessible to us. Well, many people will say, well, if you've got captions, why do you need an interpreter? Lots of people who use American Sign Language, if that was their first language, it is possible that English is not their first language. Then they may not want to read the captions. American Sign Language is a totally different structure. It's a different language. So just by them reading it, they're not getting the nuances. They're not getting the emotions. Whereas if they can see interpreters, they're getting the full picture. That's why we have captioning and interpreters here today. These two want the interpreters so they can get the emotions, see the full picture. I want the captions as a backup. And that was why I asked someone to please use the microphone, because if the captioner is not able to hear her, then I'm not getting the information. And I want as much information as possible. The Moore tornado, we had 2 deaf families who almost lost their lives because they were not hearing the sirens. So there needs to be other ways of communicating for people who are either hard of hearing or deaf. My personal experience with Hurricane Katrina, I had just started in my position. I wanted to go there and find anyone who needed some help. I had an audiologist with me. We had some batteries. He even had a couple of hearing aids that he was willing to donate. And we had some dry kits because hearing aids are not supposed to get wet. A lot of these people were stuck in storms, in levees, in rivers or whatever. And I had a difficult time finding these people. Now, the deaf people who signed were able to find each other because they were all signing, and they kind of all congregated to one part of the Astrodome. But the hard of hearing people who don't sign, I could not find them. So what I did was I got me a cardboard sign and I said, free hearing aid batteries, and I literally walked around the dome looking to help these people. We tried to work our way up in the dome to get somebody to caption what was being said. I was not understanding the announcements at all. It was a huge building, as you all know. And so the hard of hearing people or the deaf people were always the last people to find out if they were giving away free food or free shots or whatever the announcement was. They were always last. They had to, just ask people. They couldn't understand what was going on. So my suggestion was you need captioning. Find you some kind of an LD board or whatever and caption what you're saying. So why does it matter? Okay, many individuals who have hearing loss may also be caring for someone else. So let's say that we have a disaster and my grandchildren are with me at the house at that moment. I'm their caregiver, but I'm not able to hear all the announcements. So it's important not just for me, but also for the people that we care for, or the people that care for us. Some misconceptions. People who wear hearing aids or cochlear implants can all lip read. That is not true. I am a very good lip reader, but there are many people, especially if someone is late deafened or has just recently lost their hearing, they have not had time to practice. Again, it depends on the person's accent. It depends on if they have facial hair or anything over covering their mouth. It depends on the shape of their teeth, believe it or not. Because your mouth, your tongue goes in or out. We're all the same. That's not true. We have different communication needs. And we are unable, and that one gets my goat, because I can do anything you people in this room can do except hear. Please remember that. And I think you've kind of gotten that from all of us who have come up to speak today. So, some communication strategies. Not all people who have hearing loss have the same kind of communication strategy. Ask them, what's the best way for me to communicate with you? Let's suppose I reach your shelter and I did not have time to grab my processors. You know, I don't know, maybe it was a fire, maybe whatever. And so I'm coming into your shelter totally deaf. I need my processors to hear, but I don't have them. For me, I might say pen and paper would work. That's for some people, not all. Again, it's going to depend on that person's communication style. For hard of hearing people who do not sign, the best communication strategy you can use, number one, I always tell people, is to get my attention first. Make sure that I know you're talking to me. Number two, speak a little bit louder if I need you to. Ask the person. Some people don't need that volume, but speak, ask me what I need. Maybe it's noisy in the room. If we can move to a quieter place, that's even better. It may not be possible, but that's better. Rephrase if possible. Sometimes there may be one or two words in that sentence that I'm not getting because that's where my hearing loss is. So you could say that same sentence over and over, louder and louder, and I still may not get it. So rephrase it and ask that question in a different way. Ask me for confirmation. In other words, ask me what I just said, to repeat it. That way you'll know whether I understood you or not. Also ask for clarification. You know, did you understand what I said, that you need to go to that room? What room number are you going to? Something like that. Sometimes if you state the topic, that helps, so that I know whether we're talking about vaccinations or whether we're talking about locations of where you're going to move me. I'm just trying to think of examples in emergency situations. Okay, so if you know the person that you're talking with uses sign language mostly, ask them, can we write notes? For some people, they may say yes. Use gestures. Do you want some water? I need to give you a shot. I don't know if that's something y'all do in the shelters, but I'm trying to think of things. The lighting is important. For example, when I first sat down and the speaker was over here, I had that light in my eyes. And I really wanted to get up and ask somebody to move it until I realized it was for your camera. But that's something that you can ask if you're in a medical situation and there's windows, and if your back is to the window, that means the person that's looking at you who has the hearing loss, they have the light in their eyes, they cannot see your face. So sometimes maybe if you just change, but you don't, think about the lighting. If we're completely dark, if there's no electricity, I'm going to be totally lost because I have to have light to be able to see your lips and hear you. Okay, so these are some questions to ask about your shelters, and I've been fortunate to have been on the planning committee with some of the shelters, especially Fort Bend, where I'm from, and I appreciate that because they have asked me, what do you think we need to have for people who are deaf? What do we need to have for people who are hard of hearing? So if you don't know the answers to that, I brought my business cards. I'll be glad to be on your planning committee with you to help you. Texting is always good. Almost all people today who have hearing loss have some type of a mobile device, and I would much rather text than try to comprehend you on the phone. I may be able to hear you, but I wouldn't understand you. So texting is always preferred. If it's a situation where you're going door to door to let people know that there's an emergency, make sure you have a pad, a notebook pad, and pencil so that you can tell them you need to evacuate, there's a chemical spill, whatever. And then, of course, your local TV stations, again, I've been a part of that, and I hope that if we ever have any type of emergency situation, that they will have both sign language interpreters and captionings, because like I said in the beginning, we need both. So again, we want you to talk with the populations. Every disability should be on your planning committee. Share with us, give us your values, responsibilities, and count us in. Part of my contract is that I work very closely with vocational rehab counselors and people with hearing loss. So if I happen to have anyone in here who has a hearing loss, or if you know someone who has a hearing loss and they're having trouble at work because of their hearing loss, there's a lot of resources and services available to them. Please come up and see me afterwards. I'll be glad to help you. Or you may know someone, because that's what we're here for. I did bring a little exercise that I usually do, but I don't think the acoustics in this room are very good, so I'm going to bypass that and just kind of end with, there were 3 first responders that were walking down the street, and they were all hard of hearing. And the first one says, "Boy, it's windy." And the second one said, "No, it's Thursday." And the third one said, "I am too. Let's go get a drink." So even though I'm early, I'm going to go ahead and open up for questions because I know you probably have a lot. So where's my microphone? Oh, I'm going to take that one. Okay. So questions? Can you bring me my clicker? I forgot the clicker. I want to put my name up.
So Teri, in our 911 data profile that we're starting to create, we are going to add, are you deaf or hard of hearing? Or should we just say, do you need would an interpreter be a good idea? It's going to be a section where folks can just kind of check off because we want it to be helpful for, of course, the call taker to tell the responders.
Wait, keep the microphone. What information do you want when you're asking, are you deaf or hard of hearing? Because it depends on the information you're looking for.
Right. Well, what information does a responder need to know? Do they need to know, would it be helpful for them if they needed an interpreter on the scene, or just, I guess they could use a VRI service as well, right?
Depends. That's a good question, and a lot of hard of hearing people are not going to know how to answer that.
Right.
Your deaf people who sign probably will, so you should have somewhere on there, do you need an interpreter if someone responds? I don't know. That's a good question. I'll have to think about that one and get back with you. Anybody else? Come on, I know you have some questions. Okay, we've got somebody back there in the blue shirt.
Hello?
Hi there.
This may sound like an elementary kind of comment or question, but when you have a disaster, it's so chaotic, say you're at a pod and we're trying to get the attention of somebody who's deaf, what's the best way to get their attention? Would it be some type of neon sign, or what would that be?
When you say get my attention, where am I? What's the situation?
Some type of disaster, say we're having an outbreak or a disease, and you wanted this just really, really chaotic, and you wanted to provide deaf individuals with some type of service. So how would you get their attention so you can help them?
Text me. Or am I already in? Are you talking about I'm already there, or are you trying to inform me?
Yeah, you're already there, and we're trying to inform you somehow. And there's tens of thousands of people around, I don't know.
If you can have some kind of a message board, some kind of if you have captioning, that's great. I don't know if that's possible. If the person has self-identified, ask them, tell them where the announcements are going to be made so they can be right there. If you can get some of those, what do you call them when you go to a restaurant and they give you a little shaker, vibrator things to let you know? If you could have something like that on hand and give it to them so that when you're getting ready to make an announcement, they'll feel the vibration and they'll come up to where the announcements are being made. Okay. Anybody else? Yes, here we go.
I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about pictograms, and if there is a preferred company or somebody that produces pictograms?
I don't know. I think we're above that. I'm not sure. Darla and David, do y'all want to comment on that? On pictograms? We may need to give the microphone to the interpreter. Wait.
I don't think the use of pictures is very practical. And of course, it's going to be an individual decision, but for myself personally, I don't think the pictures will be effective. David, would you like to add something to that? I agree. It also is kind of an individual case-by-case basis, because not all deaf individuals are going to be skilled enough with English to be able to gather what's being offered through the caption. Many of them prefer American Sign Language as their primary means of communication, but pictures would probably be the last or the least of the resorts. But again, it is a case-by-case basis.
And that's what I would say. Thank you for your comments. To me, that's kind of demeaning. But I appreciate your question and your concern. I mean, what are you going to point to? The restroom, water, food? I don't know. Let's go. What else? What else? Are you going to give me some, or are you asking me, am I hungry? I'm not quite sure. Okay, So, back to the interpreter. Sorry. Get your exercise for today. Sorry.
There's a huge Latino deaf population that may in fact benefit from pictures because neither English or American Sign Language is their first language. So that might be a population that could be addressed using pictograms or pictures of some sort. That would give them a comprehension that wouldn't come through sign language or from written English. So there's that cultural nuance to consider as well.
So we are not an easy population for you to serve. I mean, because first you've got to figure out who's in your shelter. You know, what are their needs? So, anybody else have any questions? Over here.
Hi, my name is Julie Kim. I'm with the Mayor's Office of Public Safety, City of Houston. This is perhaps a delicate question. In a shelter situation, you have individuals with deaf and hard of hearing come into the shelter, and maybe they don't know each other, they're all strangers, they're coming from different places, different zip codes. So they come in, but you want to ensure that they are well supported in the shelter environment. Is it preferable not to separate them or place them in a certain area where we will definitely have an ACL interpreter there? Is it better to just keep them coming through? I mean, we want to be appropriately planning for the population, and we want them to have the adequate services. However, if we're in a huge auditorium like this, I would assume it would be really difficult. And so placing them in a certain area of the shelter might be one solution, but I just want to hear your thoughts.
Well, I'm not the right person to ask because that would never apply to me, but I would think that they kind of sort of gravitate together anyway because they have common communication methods. I mean, I saw that happen at the Astrodome. People who did not know each other, but they saw their hands moving, so they just kind of gravitated together. As far as hard of hearing people, they will probably not gravitate together because they don't know who's hard of hearing and who isn't. Most people are not going to disclose. I mean, you've got Aunt Mary, who's 95, who has a hearing loss, and then you have me, who's almost 95, and then you've got some younger ones, you know, they're not going to gravitate. I should think for communication purposes, if you're going to have a sign language interpreter there, they would just automatically go to the same area at least to get the information. I don't know if they would want to be sheltered in the same area. Do you assign the shelters or do the people get to choose? I've never been in one, so I don't even know. Where's the microphone? Okay.
I'd like to address the question that was just posed. And I want to emphasize that, again, that it really is an individual case-by-case basis. For some people, obviously, it would be hard to identify deaf because they share that common visual language, and so it would be easier for them to find one another. But then you also have not only the hard of hearing population, but you also have the deaf-blind population that has to be considered as well, and their needs are going to be different than those other two groups that we just mentioned. There are some who will prefer to write back and forth as opposed to getting information from the interpreter. So again, there are some who are using maybe a form of a Spanish sign language, or you have deaf individuals from all over the world who are coming here now too. So there's lots of languages and needs to be considered.
Okay, I think that looks like our question. So I thank you very much for having me, and I will stick around if you have any other questions.